Hi, my name is Liz and you're watching For Booking Out Loud. Today I'm going to talk about my top 10 books of all time. I'm going to explain why they're my favorite and what makes them top books for me. Like I explained in my ratings video, I'll put the link somewhere on top of my head. I go over this list at the end of each year and reevaluate whether these books still are my top 10s or if they should change. So because of this system, some of these books have been on this list for a decade and some of these books are relatively recent. So let's get into it. I'm not going to go through my list in any particular order because all of them I love for different reasons. And saying that, my first book on this list is Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin. This is not the HBO series. We do not talk about that TV show here, and that ending does not exist. This is solely the book and the series it encompasses. Yes, the series is not over, but I chose book number 1 in particular because this was and is one of the books that I absolutely fell in love with the characters. It is truly an epic fantasy novel that is character driven. I have absolutely fallen in love with the Stark family in this novel, and I've fallen in love with their flaws too. Martin truly demonstrates a good character novel where you are introduced to a human being. These characters are flawed, but that doesn't mean Martin doesn't want you to root for them. And as the story progresses, you find yourself knowing characters are bad and they're going to die. And that makes you truly heartbroken when they do. And that's what makes this such a good novel to me. It's politically driven, it's character driven, and I just find it so fascinating that I keep going back to it in my head. This is a top book for me. The next book I'm going to keep short, just because I've talked about it before. It's Aragon by Christopher Paolini. I cannot take this book off my list just because of the great memories it's given me, and it's just a great fantasy novel. I love this book and I don't see it getting off my top 10 lists anytime soon. What can I say? I'm nostalgic for it. The next book in my top 10 list is The Book Thief. I did not get the privilege of reading this book until about 3 years ago, and I was an emotional wreck when I finished it. The idea that death is the main narrator of the Holocaust was such a new idea for me, but looking back, I can't see how this author could have told it in another way. Having death be the narrator of such a historic tragedy and an event that took so many lives, both in the sense of World War II and the Holocaust, was so emotional in the book. And yet you still have the story of our main character just trying to live life in Nazi Germany while experiencing this through a young mind. It was just a beautiful piece of historical fiction. Next on my list, you have The Princess Saves Herself in This One by Amanda Lovelace. This is a gorgeous book of poetry in my opinion. Again, I read it about 3 or 4 years ago, and Amanda Lovelace just nails it. She nails the emotions in her poems And it truly is what it says on the back. The story of a princess turned damsel turned queen. It is a series of poems that tell the story of a woman experiencing the worst parts of life, yet triumphantly succeeding in the idea of almost fairy tales throughout the story. And while I'm reading it, it just hits home for me. I know poetry is a hit or miss for a lot of people, but this book spoke to me, and I recently reread it, and the two others in this series called Women Are Some Kind of Magic, and they're just beautiful. And I do recommend them if you have not read these books already. So the next one is a little bit weird. Well, let me tell you the book first. Interview with a Vampire by Anne Rice. I first got into this book because I'd watched the movie with my father, and I was curious about the story. I actually really liked the movie. I know some people don't, and I just fell in love with the story. The idea that even when you're an immortal, your life is fleeting is a very interesting concept for me, and I feel like Anne Rice truly explores that in her book. She explores innocence turned on its head to be evil, and she explores the idea that evil can be turned into innocence quite quickly. It's just a book that I truly do go back to. I have to admit, I can't get through the Vampire Chronicles by Anne Rice. It's a series that I do try and fail to complete it over and over again. I've read all the way to the third book, whatever it's called. I think it's the third book is Queen of the Damned or Vampire Lestat, one of those two. I get to the third book and it just gets too boring for me. But this first one, how she articulates the death of innocence, is beautiful for me. The next book in my list is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstein. This is by far one of my favorite reads. Morgenstein creates a story full of magic and mystery within 400 pages. The story begins with two master magicians making their apprentices compete within a circus arena. And it becomes so complex when you watch these apprentices grow up and then meet for the first time and then fall in love. It's such a unique premise, and it just works out so well. I ended up listening to this book through audio, and Jim Dale was the person who narrated the storyline, and he does it so beautifully. If you didn't know, Jim Dale is also the voice of the Harry Potter series, which is a series that I grew up listening to. So I also had that sense of nostalgia while listening to it, and I'm kind of a sucker for anything he narrates. However, the way that Morgenstein describes the circus, the ever-changing setting, it was just such a mystical story, and I don't think, actually I do hope that I find a story later on that will one-up it, just because it was so gorgeous listening to Jim Dale describe these settings. And I just highly suggest it too if you haven't read it. Night Circus. Top 10 for sure. So I've spoken a lot about fantasy novels because I do really enjoy fantasy. This next one really changes it for me. 5 Days at Memorial by Sherry Frank has been in my top 10 for about 5 years now. This is a nonfiction about one singular part of Hurricane Katrina. Memorial was a hospital that was pretty much underwater during Hurricane Katrina in 2007, I believe Hurricane Katrina was. Ooh. I apologize. I'll put the date somewhere down here for Hurricane Katrina. But Hurricane Katrina devastated this hospital. They had no power, they were underwater, they had hospice patients. And this was a story that Sherry Frank narrated to her full extent. She told the story of patients, she told the story of nurses, she told the story of doctors. And it was beautifully crafted to share the tragedy, the humanity, and just defend kind of what happened, but also give their own choice of judgment. One thing that truly made this book a top 10 book for me is that I actually read this during a college course, and I read it with Blood Dazzler by Patricia Smith, which is also a book of poetry about Hurricane Katrina, along with a bunch of documentaries. So not only was I getting this story about the hospital, but I was also getting personal poetry stories, I was getting visual documentary stories, and all of these things made Hurricane Katrina come to life. But I truly go back to this book, and I probably read it 5 times now, and it still gets me emotionally every time I open this book. The next book on my list is World War Z. World War Z. I've lost the cover of this book, but that is okay, because truly, I read this book for the first time on audio, and that is the version of this book that I am absolutely in love with. The audiobook of World War Z is absolutely memorizing. Max Brooks is the main narrator, but he also has a full cast supporting him. This book is about the zombie plague, and he is narrating as a documentarian, I think 10 years down the line, trying to find out the human stories of people who survived this plague. So he starts out the book interviewing people who were at the initial point of infection, patient 0. And then he works out when people truly started being infected. How did it spread? How did governments react? How did people react? And then how did people fight back? And then at the end, he interviews people that we haven't heard of since chapter 1. This full cast makes the audiobook. It was one of the first audiobooks I'd ever listened to, and I've probably listened to it about 5 times now. I will always go back to that audiobook as my comfort listen. When I'm sick, I listen to it. Maybe not now, considering the pandemic, but it's something I turn to when I just need to mentally take a break. The next book is What Girls Are Made Of. This is truly a story about finding out your worth as a human, particularly a young woman becoming an adult and what defines a bad relationship. This is a book that had me so invested into the main character. I was crying at the end just because I was so happy for the character. This character was in such a bad relationship at the start of a book, and she was 16. She didn't know what her self-worth was, and she goes through a journey to find out who she is, what her worth is, and how she can define herself outside of this toxic relationship she found herself in. I truly believe that anyone trying to discover their worth inside or outside of a relationship should read this book. And it's just something good to read, to have a feel-good, self-worth story at the end of the day. Alright, the final book of my top 10 list is Daisy Jones and the Six. This book surprised me. I think I read it last year, and I didn't realize I was going to like it that much when I picked it up. The format I thought was so interesting. It is in an interview format, and truly the story kept me turning the page throughout the book. It's about Daisy Jones becoming a rock star and the relationships within the band and how the band shoots to be one of the biggest bands in the United States. However, the book truly shows what the human experience is through navigating different relationships within the band, whether it's friendship or romances or parent to child. And it just adds that little twist of how fame complicates things to the extreme. And then at the end, there's a very large twist that just had me really invested even more so. And this is a book that I absolutely fell in love with. And that was my top 10 lists. What are your favorite books of all time? Does it change at all? Leave a comment below and let me know. Thank you for watching. I release videos on Tuesdays and Fridays at 7 a.m. I hope you're staying safe. I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye. Here you go. Is it gonna? There you go. Nope. There you go. Somewhere like that. Or parent to child. And we are done.